Okay, for this section, we're going to talk about subtracting real numbers. If you have not had a chance to watch the videos for adding real numbers, stop. Don't even move forward with this and go back and practice adding real numbers, okay? Because when you subtract real numbers, we secretly convert it to addition. And so you need to be really solid on adding real numbers and integers before you start subtracting, okay? So I think I'm going to do one video for topic 1 and 2 because they're both kind of short, and then we'll move on to the other topics, okay? So topic 1 is visualizing with a number line. So if you're subtracting a positive number, you would just move left on the number line. If you're subtracting a negative number, this is tricky and it may not make sense until we talk about the actual rules for subtraction, but when you subtract a negative number, you technically move right on the number line because subtracting a negative, it's like those two negatives undo each other and they kind of become a positive. So I actually have two examples where we look at subtracting a positive number, but I'll do another one in the corner where we subtract a negative. Okay, so example 1, it says add each pair of integers using the number line. So for part A, we have 5 minus 9. So what I would want to do here is I would figure out where my first number lies. So my first number is positive 5, so it's right here. Okay, but I want to subtract 9. That means I'm subtracting positive 9, which would move me to the left. So I would go back 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and I end up here at negative 4. So 5 minus 9 is negative 4. And if you think about that, let's say at lunchtime the temperature was 5 degrees outside. By dinner time, the temperature had dropped 9 degrees. What is the temperature at dinner time? Well, it would be negative 4 degrees. All right, next up we have negative 2 minus 6. So I would first figure out where my first number, negative 2, is. So that's going to be right here. I'm subtracting 6, which means I'm subtracting positive 6. So I would move to the left. So I would go to the left 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And that puts me here at negative 8. And again, thinking temperatures, that sort of makes sense. If the temperature is negative 2 degrees at dinner time, and then it drops an additional 6 degrees by bedtime, what is the temperature at bedtime? It would be negative 8 degrees. Now, just for the sake of practice, let's look at an example where we subtract a negative number because it is a little bit different. So I'm just going to do this up in the corner of the worksheet. So let's say we have example 1, part C. And let's say we want to take negative 3 minus negative 5. Well, this right here, if you're subtracting, whoops, I'm going off the worksheet, I think. If you're subtracting a negative number, it's really like adding. Subtracting a negative kind of has a positive end result, okay? So what happens here is we figure out where negative 3 is. So let me label this really quick. All right, so we figure out where negative 3 is. Our first number, you always just plot it. And then because we're subtracting a negative, it doesn't go to the left, it actually goes to the right. So we would move to the right 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and that puts me here at positive 2. Okay, so visually speaking, it's really easy to understand subtracting a positive number. Subtracting a negative number, it's a little weird, but you just have to know that when you subtract a negative, the end result becomes addition. Okay, so now let's talk about the actual rules for subtraction. Okay, so we're going to talk for topic 2 about subtracting integers. Now, you have to remember adding integers because what we do to subtract integers is we convert it to an addition problem. So really quick, I'm going to remind you of adding integers. So to add integers, so we're adding two integers with the same sign, we add the numbers and keep the common sign. Now, if you go back to the video where we were talking about adding integers, we used a lot of terms involving, or we used a lot of words involving absolute value. So I would have said add the absolute value of the two numbers and then keep the common sign. Okay. So you basically just take the absolute value of the two numbers you're starting with, which makes them both positive. You add them, and then if they're positive, you keep them positive. If they were negative to begin with, you keep them negative. Now, to add two numbers with different signs, you take the absolute values You subtract the two numbers, and whichever number had the larger absolute value, that's the sign you keep, okay? So kind of in short, we say to add two integers with the same sign, we add the numbers and keep the common sign. To add two numbers with different signs, we subtract the numbers and keep the sign of the larger number. So let's then talk about subtraction, because remember, the video is going to focus on subtraction for this one. So steps to subtract integers, we actually convert it to addition. We have these things called inverse operations. Inverse operations are operations that undo each other. And at this point, we've dealt with two sets of inverse, well, really three sets of inverse operations. Addition and subtraction undo each other. Multiplication and division undo each other. And then taking a square root and squaring something, those could undo each other. So in this case, it's not completely off the wall that we would convert to addition. We already did this with division of fractions. We don't know technically how to divide fractions, but we know that we can convert it to multiplication. We multiply by the reciprocal of the second number. Well, here, what we do is we add the opposite of the second number. So it's very similar to that idea of dividing fractions. So we convert to addition. In order to convert to addition, keep the first integer the same and then add the opposite of the second integer. Symbolically, we have, if you're starting with a minus b, so you've got positive a, you're subtracting positive b, you convert that by leaving a alone, and then we add the opposite of b. That negative in front of b right here just stands for the opposite of b. So if we're subtracting a positive, we would add a negative. If we're subtracting a negative, we would add a positive. All right. So let's go ahead and take a look at a few of these examples. Okay. So starting with example 2, it says practice subtracting integers. So example 2, part A, we have 12 minus 8. Let's just practice converting to addition first. So I would keep the first number the same. But instead of subtracting, I would add. But I can't just willy-nilly convert subtraction to addition. I have to do something to kind of compensate for that change in operation. Well, to change from subtraction to addition, we just add the opposite of the second number. Well, we were taking 12 minus positive 8. To convert it to addition, we take 12 plus negative 8. So now we're adding two numbers with different signs. So we subtract the numbers and keep the larger, or the sign of the larger number. So I would take 12 minus 8, which is 4. But now we have to decide, is this positive 4 or is this negative 4? So I always ask myself, did I have more positive or did I have more negative? Well, I have 12 positives, but I only have 8 negatives. That means I have more positives than negatives. So the answer here is going to stay positive 4. And that makes sense. We already know 12 minus 8. That's just like normal subtraction for us. If we have $12 and we spend 8 of them, we're left with $4. I did this example simply to prove to you that converting to addition works. Okay? Let's try the next example. So part B, we keep the first number the same. So we're just going to keep the 8. And instead of subtracting positive 12, we're going to add negative 12. So again, I'm adding two numbers that have different signs. That means I subtract the absolute values. So the absolute value of 8 is 8. The absolute value of negative 12 is 12. 12 minus 8 is 4. And then we have to ask ourselves, did I have more positive or did I have more negative? I have 8 positives. I have 12 negatives. That means I have more negatives. So 8 minus 12 is negative 4. And that should kind of make sense if you think of something really simple. So let's say that you, at lunchtime, the temperature was 8 degrees. By dinner time, it had fallen 12 degrees. What's the new temperature? It would be negative 4. All right, let's look at part C. So part C, we have negative 12 minus positive 8. First number stays the same. But instead of adding, or instead of subtracting positive 8, I'm going to add negative 8. So now I'm adding two numbers that have the same sign. When we add two numbers that have the same sign, we just add and keep the sign. So we look at the absolute values. The absolute value of negative 12 is 12. The absolute value of negative 8 is 8. 12 plus 8 is just equal to 20. But then you have to ask yourself, is it positive 20 or is it negative 20? Since both numbers were negative to start, it's like I had negative and I just added more negative to it, which makes it like extra negative. So this is going to stay negative 20. All right. Next three examples. Part D, we had -8 minus +12, so I'm going to keep my -8. Instead of subtracting +12, I'm going to add the opposite, which is adding -12. So again, I'm adding two numbers with the same sign. That means I add the absolute values and then keep whatever sign I started with. Absolute value of 8 is 8. Absolute value of 12 is 12. 8 plus 12 is 20. And again, is it going to be positive or is it going to be negative? Since both numbers to start with were negative, my final result is also going to be negative. So it's kind of like part C. I had some negative, I added more negative to it. Now it's extra negative. All right, part E, we have -8 minus -12. So here's where we're starting to subtract those negatives. So I'm going to keep the -8, but instead of subtracting -12, I'm going to add the opposite of -12. The opposite of -12 is +12. Okay, so now I'm adding two numbers with different signs. That means I subtract the absolute value. Absolute value of -8 is 8. Absolute value of 12 is 12. 12 minus 8 is 4. But now we have to determine, do we have more positive or do we have more negative? So I have 8 negatives, but I have 12 positives. I have more positives than negatives. So my final answer is going to be +4. You don't generally write the positive, but just know in your head that that is +4. And then finally, last example, we have 12 minus -8. We keep the 12. We want to add the opposite of -8. The opposite of -8 is +8. So here I'm just adding two positives. This is like regular traditional addition that you first learn. So 12 times or 12 plus 8 is 20. And because both numbers were positive, the final result is positive. Now, for the most part, students can follow this. The struggle they have is something similar to part E, or that should not say part D, that should say part F. That's a typo on my part. Sorry about that. So E and F, students struggle with that idea of subtracting a negative. And the best way I can come up with it is if you take away a bad habit, the end result is good. Okay, so think of it as removing something bad, the result is positive. So it turns it to addition. All right, so make sure you understand visually what's happening when you're subtracting integers, and make sure you understand the basis of converting subtraction to addition and how to do each of these 6 examples. Okay, next video we'll talk about adding real numbers.